Leonidas is celebrated today as the immortal king who led 300 warriors against impossible odds at Thermopylae. But behind the shining bronze and Hollywood heroics lies a truth far more disturbing. Sparta, the society that shaped him, was not a noble warrior state. It was a militarized prison camp, its foundations built on the broken backs of 250,000 enslaved helots. These were not foreigners. They were Greeks, the original inhabitants of the land, reduced to a permanent underclass. For every Spartan citizen, 7 helots lived, worked, and died under their boots. And every single year, Sparta declared open season on them. This wasn't metaphorical war. It was legal murder, a state-sanctioned purge where young Spartans were encouraged, expected, to kill helots without trial, without reason, without consequence. Modern audiences imagine Sparta as a disciplined warrior society, but this was something far closer to industrial extermination. Leonidas, the man later mythologized as Greece's savior, was one of this system's finest products. He was never meant to be king. As the third son, the spare's spare, Leonidas entered childhood with almost no destiny at all, but Sparta carved one into him. At age 7, he was ripped from his mother's arms and thrust into the agoge, a state-run crucible designed not to educate boys, but to unmake them, to strip away compassion, to burn away fear, to create humans who felt pain but did not react to it. Food was deliberately scarce. Boys had to steal or starve, and if they were caught, it wasn't the theft that earned punishment, it was the failure. One legendary boy hid a stolen fox beneath his cloak. The animal ate through his stomach as he stood silently, refusing to betray himself. This was the standard Sparta demanded. By 12, boys were assigned mentors, older warriors whose relationship roles blurred into territory that would horrify any modern society. At 18 came the krypteia, the darkest ritual of all. The most promising youths were sent into the countryside with nothing but a dagger and an unspoken command. Kill helots. Kill any you find. Kill especially the strong, the bold, the ones who might one day rebel. Leonidas thrived. He returned after a year with 17 confirmed kills, exceptional by Spartan standards. Then fate intervened. His half-brother, King Cleomenes, unstable, unpredictable, died in prison under suspicious circumstances. Suicide, they claimed. Few believed it. And suddenly the throne, which should never have been his, slid into Leonidas's hands. The lion's son had been forged, and the world would soon learn what Sparta had created. As Persia's power swelled across the east, Leonidas responded not with fear, but with steel. He tightened Sparta like a fist. The agoge became harsher, its lessons sharper. The krypteia, the secret program that sent young men into the countryside to eliminate selected helots, expanded in scale, and the annual state-sanctioned killings of Sparta's enslaved population accelerated. To face the world's greatest empire, Leonidas believed Sparta must first conquer its own humanity. When word reached Greece that Xerxes was assembling the largest army the ancient world had ever known, other city-states debated strategy, diplomacy, alliances. Sparta sharpened its knives. Archaeologists today uncover weapons caches buried across Spartan territory, dating back to 481 BC. Silent proof that Leonidas had been preparing for something far larger than defense. He was preparing a story, a memory, a legend. The 300 Spartans chosen for Thermopylae were not the strongest or most decorated warriors. They were selected for a colder reason. Each man had a living son to inherit his name. Leonidas was not sending elites into battle. He was sending bloodlines to slaughter, ensuring Sparta's lineage survived even as its warriors did not. In his mind, they were already dead. All that remained was to decide how they would die. But the famous 300 were never alone. Sparta's legends rarely mention it, but each warrior marched with 7 enslaved helots. Men who carried the true weight of war, shields, spare spears, rations, armor. They trudged behind their masters as silent shadows, knowing they would receive no honor, no record, not even a name. In total, 2,100 helots walked beside the Spartans toward Thermopylae. They marched under the same blazing sun, breathed the same dust, stared at the same mountains. But unlike the men they served, They marched without glory and without hope. Leonidas knew what lay ahead. The Persians were coming. Greece was fractured, and the only way to unite it was through a spectacle of sacrifice so unforgettable, so horrifying, that even centuries later, the earth would still remember. The war in Leonidas's mind was already decided. Only the deaths remained. Leonidas did not tell the truth when he left Sparta. To the ephors, he claimed the march was a religious procession, nothing more than a ceremonial escort for the Krypteia festival. But the truth marched with him in the dust. 300 Spartans, handpicked to die, and 2,100 helots who would receive no memory at all. It was not a procession, it was a funeral march, and Leonidas already knew whose funeral it would be. Yet the Spartans were not alone for long. As the red cloaks moved north through the rugged Greek countryside, other city-states began attaching their own contingents to the column. Thespians, Thebans, Corinthians, Arcadians, 6,700 Greek allies joined the force, convinced they were participating in a united stand for the survival of Greece. They believed in honor, in brotherhood, in shared sacrifice. History would later forget they ever existed. Thermopylae, the hot gates, was a place carved by nature for death. Sulfur steam drifted from the earth like breath from the underworld. The narrow pass squeezed down to a space barely wide enough for 8 men abreast. On one side, the mountains rose like jagged teeth. On the other, a sheer drop plunged straight into the sea. Leonidas stood in that corridor of stone and salt water, studying it not as a soldier, but as someone choosing the shape of a legend. Here, he decided, the world would end for him and begin for Greece. When Persian scouts finally reached the pass, expecting a barricaded army, they instead found Spartans calmly exercising in the open. Some combed their long hair. Others oiled their bodies like athletes preparing for a celebration. It was not madness, it was psychological warfare. A message carved into motion. We do not fear you. A captured scout was released with a warning for Xerxes. Tell the great king the sons of Heracles are waiting. Soon Persian envoys arrived, offering generous terms. Keep your lands, live in peace, prosper under the empire. Leonidas responded with a spectacle engineered to chill the invaders. He made them witness Spartan punishment of helots, a deliberate display that declared, "We are not reasonable men." The march was over, the trap was set, and the hot gates waited. Dawn broke over Thermopylae with a pale, metallic light, and Xerxes finally unleashed the first wave. The Medes, expendable infantry meant to gauge Spartan strength, advanced in dense ranks. They expected resistance. They did not expect perfection. When the command rang out, the Spartan phalanx locked into motion like moving iron. Shields overlapped, spears leveled, and the narrow pass became a funnel of controlled destruction. The Medes pushed forward and simply stopped, crushed by a discipline they had never seen. Within minutes, the front ranks buckled. Spartan spears created a wall no soldier could breach. What looked like chaos from the Persian side was in truth a machine, one Leonidas had spent a lifetime building. But hidden beneath that brilliance was a truth Sparta never recorded. Behind the shield wall, helots worked relentlessly, dragging bodies out of the way, bringing replacement weapons, keeping formation supplies flowing, and absorbing dangers the Spartans refused to face. For every Spartan who fell, several helots were lost. Their labor made the phalanx unstoppable, but history would never carve their names into stone. By midday, Xerxes sent the immortals, his elite, the undefeated core of his empire. They moved with confidence, shields polished, armor scaled like shining serpent skin, but the hot gates trapped them just as it had the Medes. They charged into a space too tight, too narrow, too perfectly chosen by a king who welcomed death. The immortals met warriors who had been conditioned since childhood to eliminate hesitation. Their training, their numbers, their legacy, none of it mattered in a corridor of stone where discipline outweighed mass. Arrows eventually darkened the sky. Waves of missiles hissed through the airs until sunlight dimmed. The Spartans answered with a joke that traveled through the lines like fire. Then we shall fight in the shade. Their humor masked ruthless calculation. By noon, Persian losses numbered in the thousands. Spartan casualties remained small, but the cost to the helots was staggering. As night fell, Persian infiltrators attempted a silent approach, hoping darkness would succeed where daylight had failed. But the Spartans had trained blindfolded since childhood. The shadows offered no advantage. Day one ended where it began, with Leonidas's machine still turning, and Persia learning that numbers alone could not break the hot gates. The second day rose over Thermopylae like a warning. Dawn revealed a battlefield warped by exhaustion. The Persians rotated fresh troops again and again, pouring new lines of warriors into the pass without pause. The Spartans, with no reserves, had only their discipline to stand on. The narrow corridor had become a place where even the air felt bruised. Fallen men were so numerous that Persian soldiers could not collect their comrades without stepping directly into the Spartan killing zone. Disease began to whisper across the battlefield. Persian morale flickered, yet the Spartans did not bend. But on this day, something shifted, something dangerous. Leonidas's own brother, Doriaeus, took an arrow directly through the small opening of his helmet. He dropped instantly, and a ripple of realization swept through the Greek ranks. It was the first undeniable reminder that Spartan flesh was mortal, that legend could bleed. As the fighting intensified, word spread that Persian scouts and mountain troops were moving along a hidden path behind the cliffs. A local Greek named Ephialtes had revealed it to Xerxes in exchange for gold and protection. But later, archaeological markers, stone waypoints carved with Spartan symbols, suggest Leonidas already knew the path existed. Perhaps he had even counted on betrayal, calculating that a trap needed a final collapse to seal its legend. By afternoon, Persian pressure became overwhelming. Fire arrows hissed through the sky, drums thundered, commanders shouted in multiple languages. Waves of shield-push assaults crashed into the Spartan phalanx like ceaseless storms. One by one, Spartan champions, men shaped by decades of training, fell. Not because they broke, but because even iron wears thin under endless weight. At dusk, Greek scouts returned with the truth Leonidas had expected. Within hours, they would be surrounded. The noose was tightening from behind the mountains and from the front of the pass. The defenders would soon have nowhere left to retreat. For the Spartans, this meant only one thing. The third day would not be a battle. It would be an end. Night settled over Thermopylae with the weight of a final judgment. Inside a dimly lit war tent, the surviving Greek commanders gathered around Leonidas. The Thespians spoke first, pledging to remain to the end. Their voices trembled, not with fear, but with conviction. The Thebans, eyed with suspicion for rumored Persian loyalties, were ordered to stay. No discussion, no appeal. Then Leonidas dismissed the rest. To the departing soldiers, it looked like compassion, an honorable king sparing the majority from certain death. But for Leonidas, mercy had nothing to do with it. He was constructing a story that would outlive cities, and stories required control. Witnesses complicated legends. After the tent cleared, Leonidas called his captain close and delivered a command that froze even hardened warriors. When the encirclement begins, no one escapes. Not the allies, not the helots. Every survivor could unravel the narrative he intended to forge. And so survival for them was forbidden. When Leonidas addressed his remaining men, his speech did not mention Greece, democracy, or liberty. He spoke instead of legacy, of becoming more than mortal, of embracing death so completely that history would have no choice but to remember them. For his Spartans, this was not doom, it was destiny. To the helots, his words were colder. They were to hold the flanks, absorb the first impacts, and buy precious moments. They would die so the legend could live. As the last torches burned low, a hush fell over the camp. The night before annihilation has a sound, part expectation, part resignation, part eerie calm. The earth itself seemed to brace. Then came the final dawn. Trumpets erupted from the cliffs behind them, from the pass ahead, and from the shoreline. The encirclement was not a fear, it was a fact. The immortals had descended the mountain path. The Persian main force advanced toward the front. Naval troops moved along the coast. Leonidas watched the noose tighten with an expression that was neither shock nor despair. It was recognition. Everything had happened exactly as he intended. The final phase of Thermopylae did not unfold like a desperate last stand. It moved instead with the cold precision of a plan long prepared. Leonidas had not come to survive. He had come to shape the story that would outlive nations. At dawn, the Spartans did something unthinkable. They abandoned the stone wall they had defended for 2 days and charged into open ground. It was a suicidal maneuver, designed not to hold the pass but to inflict maximum damage before the tide swallowed them. The narrow defense that had sheltered them was gone. Only raw violence remained. As the formation began to fracture under overwhelming numbers, Leonidas issued his final, terrible command, one meant to erase the hidden architecture behind Sparta's legend. The helots who had served, carried, and bled for the Spartan machine were to be eliminated first, not by Persian blades, but by Spartans. No enslaved witness could survive to speak of what had truly happened in the hot gates. The Thebans who tried to surrender were also struck down, condemned as traitors in the chaos. Then the center collapsed. What followed was chaos made ritual. Spartans and Persians collided over the fallen body of their king, each side desperate to claim him. Weapons shattered, shields were crushed. The fight stripped down to the most primitive forms of survival: grappling, striking, grappling again. The remaining defenders gathered around Leonidas's corpse, forming a shrinking ring atop a small rise of earth. Sunlight glinted off their armor as they made their last stand. Watching the relentless losses mount, Xerxes finally ordered his archers forward to end it. A storm of arrows swept across the hilltop, overwhelming the last defenders. Leonidas fell where he had chosen to die, his final expression carrying something disturbingly close to satisfaction. The entire defense had taken just over 2.5 hours to erase. After the battlefield quieted, Xerxes commanded that Leonidas's body be mutilated. His head struck off, and his remains displayed in violation of both Persian and Greek customs. But this act, meant to humiliate Sparta, only ensured the opposite. The king who died at Thermopylae became a symbol not of defeat but of myth, precisely as Leonidas had intended. When the smoke cleared and the tide receded from the hot gates, only 2 Spartans remained alive. Both of them men Leonidas had sent away before the final day. Their survival was not treated as fortune, but as shame. In Sparta, defeat was not the unforgivable sin. Survival was. One took his own life rather than endure the dishonor. The other lived under a shadow so deep that even his later heroism could not free him from it. This was the world Leonidas built, a society where living could be a crime. And as soon as the king's body cooled, Sparta's propaganda machine began its work. The 7,000 Greeks who fought on the first 2 days, forgotten, folded into a single number: 300 Spartans. The 2,100 helots who marched, carried, served, and died, they vanished entirely, erased not by accident, but by design. The Thespians who chose to stay, reduced to footnotes. The Thebans forced to remain, labeled cowards. In the retelling, every inconvenient truth was cut away like unwanted marble. What survived was a statue, clean, heroic, impossibly simple. A king who died for freedom, a small band of warriors who defied 1 million invaders. A moment of pure valor against tyranny. But archaeology later uncovered the truth beneath the myth. Mass graves at Thermopylae revealed neatly separated Spartan dead, buried with careful honors. Nearby, in rough, unmarked pits, lay thousands of helots. Their bones bore signs not only of the battle, but of Spartan weapons. They had been killed deliberately, silenced to ensure the legend held. Sparta believed it had secured immortality. Instead, it secured its own destruction. For centuries after Thermopylae, the Spartans continued to kill the people who produced their food, raised their children, and carried their burdens. Generation after generation of helots were culled under the pretext of maintaining order. By 371 BC, the number of Spartan citizens had collapsed. Their state, once feared across Greece, was a shell. When the helots finally rose, the system that had oppressed them crumbled with shocking speed. And yet, even in ruin, the myth did not die. Romans adopted it. Renaissance scholars polished it. Modern storytellers turned it into spectacle. Western culture embraced the image of Leonidas as a champion of liberty, while ignoring the brutal truth he embodied. The defenders of freedom were men who rejected it entirely. Thermopylae became a story about courage, cleansed of the thousands who died to protect a narrative. Leonidas became a symbol of resistance, even though he represented a society where mercy was weakness and survival itself could be treason. The legacy ends with a truth as sharp as any Spartan spear. Some monsters wear lion skins. Some monsters become heroes. And sometimes 2,500 years is not enough to wash away the blood of those who were never meant to be remembered.